You're watching PCC TV, Pinellas County Connection Television, a division of Pinellas County Communications.
Today we are here to learn about the Belleview Biltmore and its influence on Clearwater and Pinellas County during the World War II era. In the Clearwater area there was the Belleview Biltmore, the Fort Harrison and the Gray Moss Inn were used here, and then Fenway and Dunedin. There were some other places up in Tarpon. I'm not sure of the names, if there were hotels, hostelries used. Don Cesar in St. Petersburg, the Vinoy were used down there. Don Cesar was actually a hospital used by the military, so a number of them were used. I was surprised at how much the economy was affected in Clearwater, and I thought, you know, all these people coming in, all these soldiers, you know, people would flee, that it wouldn't really bring anything, and just the number of $2 million in stamp revenue in a year. That number just boggled my mind, because today $2 million in stamp revenues would probably be a lot, not to mention 1942 to 1943. So my background, I have been teaching history for 16 years at the middle school and high school level. I have been in graduate school at UCF, and then I transferred to USF when we moved back from out of state, and I've been a student in the Florida Studies program. Well, recently I transferred in. I was at Tampa, but transferred to the Florida Studies program after taking a couple classes with Dr. Gary Mormino, and didn't really like Florida all that much before his class. Didn't think Florida had much history until I took that class and I realized, oh my goodness, it's a treasure trove of history, and delved in that way. The information's out there. It's difficult to get to, mainly because it's microfiche at the Clearwater Public Library and the other public libraries. It's not out there. And then it comes from individuals who, unfortunately, we're losing every day just because of age wise. So, but I found that once I opened one door, another opened. And writing the initial paper, there was a point where I had to say, okay, I have to stop. I could have kept going and going and going, but you've got to stop so you can finish the paper. I firmly believe, after teaching history for 16 years, that you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been. And Mark Twain said, history doesn't rhyme, or history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And so that always, you know, clues me into we're destined, you know, to repeat things if we don't watch what's happened before. So history is definitely a key aspect to making our lives better and not worse. Why I'm doing this, I have an added interest in the Belleview Biltmore. It's just a beautiful hotel. I love the structure, the architecture of it. I guess I'm glorifying, you know, and romanticizing the history of the hotel. But in my research, I also found, going back prior to the World War II era, during the Great Depression, that the town of Bel Air was formed by the owners of the Bellevue Biltmore. So there's this tie there between a whole township and a hotel, which I'm hoping to delve into a little deeper.
Recruit William Tordoff walked out of his room, one he shared with 7 other trainees, turned right, and then strolled down the elegant staircase to the even grander foyer of the Queen of the Gulf. At 20 years of age, Bill was one of thousands drafted into the Army Air Corps and trained at the Bellevue Biltmore during World War II. A self-described farm boy from Iowa, He could not help but be slightly in awe of the grand lady who housed him, while he trained for almost 2 months before going off to fight the Japs. On this particular day it was cool enough to wear an overcoat, but he knew it would warm up considerably in the area known as the Sparkling City. The training grounds, once a world-renowned golf course, were muddy in places with tree trunks, fences, and other objects to be used in training young men for war. Bill and the others would have their butts worked off by the marching, drilling, and playing soldier. Every one of them was proud to serve. Overall, the Bellevue was enjoyable, even though some training caused sore spots. On one occasion, the trainees had to jump into a ravine to elude the enemy. What they did not know was that Florida's enemy were the prickly sand spurs in those ravines. He spent the weekend picking those out and was more careful in the future when jumping into places. All part of the training to look before you leap. Colonel Levy escorted a group of county and city officials through the course and offered to let them try it out. Like a swarm of bees, they crawled and hurtled and ran through the course, denying the reality that their bodies were older than their minds. As the physical trainer watched them leave with smiles of success on their faces, he knew what the morning would bring. The Belleview Biltmore was a grand resort with 425 rooms by the time the Army Air Corps leased the building and grounds. A self-sufficient resort, it was the perfect spot to barrack the overflow of military staff from bases MacDill and Drew Field in Tampa, Florida. On the Gulf Coast, the Bellevue, along with the Fort Harrison Hotel and the Gray Moss Inn, housed over 3,000 soldiers for over a year. Civilians were inexorably drawn into the life of the military, with dim-outs, rationing, and weekly parties and special events. August 1942 was the turning point for the Bellevue, as thousands of trainees came to the hotels. The Bellevue, as the largest in-use wooden structure, had its trainees going on fire watches, until eventually the Army would install a $200,000 sprinkler system. It was finished the day the Army moved out and is still in use today. In addition to St. Louis, Sioux Falls, Hollywood, and L.A., there were trainees from China, England, and one full-blooded Paiute Indian from Flagstaff. During their off time, soldiers made their way to the downtown area, crowding Cleveland Avenue's restaurants and shops. As soldiers poured into the hotels, the area's businesses began to boom. Concerns in the Clearwater area arose over lost revenue from tourists. To alleviate any worries, the Clearwater Sun ran a full-page ad throughout the season with a question-and-answer page that included information regarding recreational facilities, beach use, blackouts, and transportation. As shops and restaurants altered life for soldiers, the soldiers gave back with entertainment. Boxing, wrestling, and team sports were part of the training of a good soldier. It kept him fit and able to go out there and fight the enemy. The Army began taking on the Marines from Dunedin in the boxing ring at the Municipal Auditorium. Writing and reading rooms, games, pool and ping-pong tables, juke radios, and dancing were available every day, in addition to art instruction, dancing instruction, and basketball and volleyball. The Army Air Corps staged shows and parades for civilians. Armistice Day exhibited the largest military parade in the history of the Clearwater area, with over 1,000 soldiers from the Air Corps, Marines, and Coast Guard in attendance. The new year brought in a new outlet for the troops as the Sun ran columns created by soldiers. Dots and dashes from 588, Strictly GI, and At the Gate with 918 told stories of life as a soldier. Civilians had an immense amount of curiosity, and rumors abounded in the area. One major rumor surrounded the issue of food. Some in the area suspected the Army was wasting food. Within a week, the Army met the rumors head-on in the Clearwater Sun. Captain Truitt prepared an article firmly denying that they were wasting food and explaining how serving a large number of people sometimes produced a large problem. He compared the mess cook with Mrs. Housewife, reminding women how difficult it was to cook for just one family. Imagine how difficult it was to get enough nutritious food for our boys training to fight. Recruits were undergoing a strenuous physical training program and must be adequately fed. County officials dined at the Bellevue and reinforced the Army claims. Ultimately, the Sun concluded that the Army wasted less food than millionaires, comparing the Army use to that when it was a millionaire resort. Added to this was the fact that the Army was salvaging everything possible, raking leaves for fertilizer, picking meat to the bones for soup, and saving tin cans, fats, and greases. Eating in the Bellevue dining hall with its stained glass windows had distinct advantages. However, it had its disadvantages too. One private became stymied by a tangerine, calmly peeling and eating one, then another, until he had to loosen his belt. After 44 of the luscious citrus, he declared that he would never eat another tangerine as long as he lived. The month of March proved to be a rat-infested one, with merchants reporting as many as 50 young chickens being killed by rats. They requested the Army aid in the hunting of the rats, as well as starting an anti-rat campaign of educating the public. To this end, 2 privates were sent out on various evenings to search for where the rats were living and what could be done to eradicate the unwanted saboteurs. As rumors began circulating about the training centers being moved out to Nebraska, confirmation of 2 Miami centers moving to Mississippi and Texas came, yet nothing on the Clearwater area. Even Senator Claude Pepper knew nothing. 2 weeks later, the Army canceled the 3 one-year contracts in the area, along with hotels in St. Petersburg. In August 1943, all 3 Clearwater hotels were turned back over to their owners, and plans were made to reopen for the winter season. Unfortunately, the Grand White Queen of the Gulf would not be so lucky. Even though losses at the hotel were amazingly small, the decision was made to sell the hotel to local land baron Ed C. Wright for $275,000 at auction. The Bellevue remained closed during Wright's ownership, but was renovated, sold, and reopened in 1947. Like America, it continued to prosper as the socially elite came back. Today, the Queen is ready for renovation. Wait, restoration. On June 1, 2009, the Bellevue closed its doors for at least 2 years. Nothing will be untouched in an attempt to restore the Bellevue to its former glory. One thing that won't change is the aura of majesty that she has always emanated.
Thank you very much for having me, and I have to thank Ellen and Jim for extending the invitation, and also thank Gary Mormino, who is Professor of Florida Studies at USF St. Pete. Without his guidance, I would not have been drawn in this direction immediately and ultimately be here with you sharing it. So thanks to all of you for having me. My study of the Bellevue Biltmore originally came about because it is such a fascinating hotel. Originally built in 1897 by Henry Plant, along with the Tampa, what is now University of Tampa, number of hotels bringing the railroad into Florida, into Pinellas County. And the fact that it is the largest wooden structure under one roof still in use, technically not right now as it's going under restoration, but that's what got me interested in the hotel, and the fact that it is still there, all the controversy over whether or not they should close it, why it is still open. So I started delving into its history a little bit, and the only book that they have on the history of the Bellevue Biltmore is probably about as thick as my thumb, and it's mostly pictures. So I thought, what a treasure trove there must be there. And Dr. Mormino said, well, narrow it down because, 100 years plus of history is going to be a lot for one paper. And I said, yeah, you're right. So I looked at World War II because a lot of people don't realize that World War II did come to Florida. We're a peninsula. We stick out there. We've got lots of water. Obviously, we're going to be under attack at some point by submarines, things of that nature, and Tampa, the Tampa Bay area being here, proved very fruitful for bases, for training. Why do people come to Florida? The weather, right? It never snows in Florida. Well, rarely. There have been a couple times. But they come here for the weather, and it proved to be the perfect training ground. What they did not have were barracks to house all the troops. So when they came down here and put the soldiers at MacDill, Drew Airfield, which is now Tampa International Airport, they needed somewhere to place these soldiers and to train them. So the hotels, many rooms, beautiful grounds where they can train the soldiers, were leased by the Army Air Corps. Bellevue Biltmore was one of the first ones that was leased in August of 1942. Initially, 400 soldiers came, and they worked on leases of the Fort Harrison Hotel and the Gray Moss Inn, which was right across from the Fort Harrison. It's since been torn down. But approximately 3,000 soldiers came through and trained in this area. And the impact that it had on Clearwater was tremendous, and a lot of people seem to forget that Clearwater, was one of the major cities. Wasn't that big. Yes, St. Petersburg was bigger. But the focus seems to be on St. Pete, Tampa, and having grown up in this area since I was 2, I wanted to bring that out and say, hey, look, here we are. Clearwater is something to be reckoned with, and the Bellevue Biltmore herself. So the paper that I wrote, I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Bill Tordoff. He lives in Sarasota. Wonderful gentleman. And he was stationed at the Bellevue Biltmore, came back to Florida, as a number of soldiers did after the war. And he talked about being stationed there and how wonderful it was. And I guess others around the nation could be somewhat jealous of the soldiers at the Bellevue Biltmore. How many of you have been in the hotel? Yeah. I mean, you walk into the Tiffany Ballroom, and you look up. I mean, could you imagine, gentlemen, majority of you have served, right? Basic training at the Bellevue Biltmore. Mess hall, Tiffany glass. It was just incredible. And walking down those stairs and walking out onto the training ground, which was where the first tee was incredible. But became muddy, tree trunks thrown down, and Bill does recall one training where they jumped over a fence into a ravine, and he said he would never do that again because he jumped into a pile of sand spurs, and they spent the rest of the day pulling those out. But it did teach the soldiers that you had to look before you leap, definitely. So Florida was a unique place to train our soldiers. He also said he was called out, and he hadn't been the drill instructor yet. They rotated them. And so he gets down there, and he's wearing this heavy coat, his winter coat in Florida. And the drill instructor said, "Why haven't you been DI yet, recruit?" And Bill's reply was, "It's bad enough to be drilling in the hot sun. I don't want to be yelling things, too." So he didn't lose his sense of humor, got through, was sent out to, as he says, fight the Japs, and came back to his wife and new baby, and they lived in Illinois for a while and then came back down here. Clearwater itself, even though the Bellevue Biltmore is uniquely tied to the city of Bel Air, the town of Bel Air, rather, the Bellevue Biltmore's impact on Clearwater during this area, a lot of people tend to ignore the economic benefits. A lot of people said at the time, well, we're going to lose tourism, we're going to lose dollars. But with 3,000 soldiers in the area, once they finished training, they had some time off, and they went to Cleveland Street, and they perused the businesses and the restaurants there. Rules were changed. In Clearwater, the liquor stores had to change when they could sell their alcohol due to the soldiers getting off from training and going into town. But They willingly did that. Other stores actually stayed open later to accommodate the soldiers. And so they had a good time celebrating after a tough day of drilling in the hot Florida sun with the local girls. And that was one of the issues which the high school boys here in Clearwater did not particularly like. The soldiers took all the girls, and so the Clearwater High School boys had to go to Tampa to find their dates. So I'm sure they were happy to see the soldiers go. However, crime did drop while the soldiers were here. Imagine that, crime dropping, no one wanting to do anything bad while the military is in town. But we had the Army Air Corps in Clearwater. There were the Marines in Dunedin and the Coast Guard in St. Petersburg and Tarpon Springs. So the entire county was affected by this. When the soldiers moved in, they were responsible for preparing the Belleview Biltmore for the rest of the troops. And so they pretty much got it ready, just as they would during, the fall season for the millionaires to come down, and they weeded and they pruned and they cleaned. And there's a gentleman by the name of Clint Mitchell, who I had the honor of meeting and talking to one Saturday morning as he was at his local diner and lager there. And he said when he was a youngster, he went and helped clean out the Bellevue Biltmore. And he said everything was taken out of there, and it was placed into storage at what was the Weaver Grocery Warehouse in Clearwater. After that, however, we don't know where any of the Bellevue Biltmore's furnishings, paintings, anything else went. It was owned by Kirkby Industries, and we believe that they were farmed out to other Kirkby hotels. But also the documents that were with the Bellevue Biltmore after the war, gone. So it's a little difficult to find out where everything is. And as Jim said, I've been searching through microfiche, the Clearwater Sun, trying to find information. Went through an entire year. Took a while. It can be done. It can be done. So they did that. It was a fire hazard, being the wooden structure that it is. It had a fire department that it shared with the town of Bel Air, along with its post office and its water system. And the soldiers, the Army came in and put in a state-of-the-art sprinkler system, $200,000. It actually was finished the day the Army moved out, but it is still there. And as of its closing, it was still up to code. So don't say that the military doesn't do things right. They can put in good things. The soldiers, as I said, 400 were there. They became Group C Replacement Training Center, and were basically trained in martial laws, basic hygiene, as well as the basic training that they went through. All over the country, people came. There was a gentleman actually from Flagstaff, Private John Truehorse, who was described as one boy that can really say he's a full-blooded American. So people from all over came to Clearwater, to the Bellevue Biltmore, and really changed, I think, the perception in the town of what an American could be. The day that they opened up for the public to come see what was going on, they had a 58-piece band that played music, while the military police controlled traffic patterns, and a time-honored retreat ceremony with a parade that entertained the general population on their 2 swanky golf courses, as it was put in the Clearwater Sun. And like I said, during their time off, they moved down to what Clearwater was known as the Sparkling City, which I thought was unique because we don't hear that anymore, the Sparkling City of Clearwater. I think we need to bring that back, as we are the Sparkling City. So they went downtown, and relationships between the civilian population and the soldier population was reciprocal. As the civilians gave to the soldiers gave back with entertainment of their own. They would hold boxing matches at the Clearwater Municipal Auditorium. And the first one started off between the Army Air Corps at the Bellevue and the Marines in Dunedin, or from Dunedin. So weekly, you had Clearwater Sun write-ups of who was boxing and when they were boxing, and you had thousands in attendance at that auditorium. Eventually, the civilian population complained about, what were these soldiers doing boxing? Shouldn't they be training for war? And you had the reply come that these guys were training after they had already trained. All day long, they went through their basic training, and then they went down to the auditorium and they practiced their boxing, which a lot of people didn't realize. But you had that criticism coming out after almost a year of the soldiers being in town. And you can think, here you may have a son off fighting, and you look at Clearwater and you see these guys having a good time. It's like, what are they doing having a good time? But they were training. And boxing, if anyone has boxed, it's an exercise in itself. So they were definitely getting their training. As Thanksgiving came around, you had articles popping up in the Clearwater Sun asking if anyone wanted a soldier for Thanksgiving or wanted to bake a pumpkin pie. So soldiers who were away from their families could be adopted by Clearwater townspeople, which made it very nice. As Christmas drew near, the combined forces of the 588, the 413, and the 918 squadrons put on the boxing shows, as well as a group of cross-dressing soldiers that vastly amused the spectators. So they went home celebrating Christmas with good thoughts, and surprisingly, Christmas of 1942 was rather quiet. There were no DUIs, no large hauls made in the juke joints, and only 2 youths were brought before the magistrate on charges of fighting. So compare that to today, and I think there was some good times to be had. They did have some questionable times at the Belleview Biltmore when it came with regards to rationing. Those of you who were alive at the time during World War II know that certain foods were scarce, and Bill Tordoff remembers seeing, when he first got to the Bellevue Biltmore, seeing a trash can full of Salisbury steak. And so rumors got out that the soldiers were eating very well and wasting food. And so Colonel Lindley, who was the leader at the Bellevue Biltmore, invited the city council to come in and look over what was going on, to eat with the soldiers. And there were also articles presented saying, Mrs. Housewife out there, imagine all the troubles that you have feeding your family of 4 or 5 people. We've got thousands. And your children don't always eat what they're given, do they? My own child. So imagine, thousands of children who won't eat what they're given. So they said, we're putting it out there, we're giving them what they need, and if they don't eat it, that's nothing we can really do about that. So it came back, and they actually said that the soldiers were more thrifty than the Bellevue was under, its millionaire status. So that worked out very well. The Army actually salvaged everything possible while it was in the hotels. They raked leaves for fertilizer. They picked the meat from the bones and used the bones for soup. They saved the tin cans. Fats, greases were recycled. So everything that they could recycle, they did. Let's see, there was a quote I wanted to read to you. And let's see, it's basically the Army reminding civilians that there's a war going on, and the military has a certain way of doing things. So with regards to preparing food and rationing things, Mrs. Housewife with her children, yeah, you can relate somewhat, but not exactly. And in War and Peace, Lindley said, "The Army in this country confines itself to the important business of training troops. That's a big enough job. Whatever explanation it may make to the general public of its operations includes only that unclassified information which will not impede the effectiveness of this training program. However, it does attempt to describe to the citizens at home all they are entitled to know about what is, after all, a civilian army preparing to defend and fight for the common good." So you read that in the paper and you kind of go, oh, okay, you put me in my place, I'll be good right now. So they had their good times. At the turn of the year, 1943, you actually had the squadrons at the different hotels writing articles and sharing life at the hotels. And Chick Rosnick, who was a staff sergeant for the 918, and Private George Reedy Jr. from the 413 showered people with information weekly. And Rosnick actually began his column answering the question, how does it feel to live in the swankiest hotel in the country? And the answer came from Private X. I guess this private didn't want his name to be known. It said, "It's like this. We have the softest mattresses on our hotel beds, but they have to be always ready for inspection, so we can't lie on them. We have $1 million golf course, but all we do on it is the hardest kinds of exercises and obstacle running. We have beautiful green tennis courts, but that's where we air our beds out after carrying them down 5 flights of stairs. We have a spacious and fully equipped recreation room to be used in our leisure time, but I've forgotten what leisure time means. We have lovely green velvet lawns, but we can't walk on them. We have a telephone in every room, but we can't talk through them. We're pounding our feet when the beautiful dawn breaks, and we're knocked out when the glorious sun sets." So, a number of them did have fun, but obviously not all of them. Another humorous story of eating in the Belleview Biltmore came with Private First Class Joe Reese. He was stymied by a tangerine that he came upon, and there was a big bundle of them, and so he broke it open and he ate. And oddly enough, he was on his way to meet a girl, but he ate the one tangerine and it tasted really good, and he ate another one and that tasted good too, and he ate another one and lingered a while, took off his blouse, sat down, and after consuming 40 of the luscious citrus, he declared that he would never eat another tangerine as long as he lived. So, very humorous stories, and if you get a chance to look up one of these articles, you know, they're good reading. It really is good reading. Maybe that'll be my next project, Jim. Get all those documented. So you could restrict a man to base if he was, you know, bad and say you can't go into town, but hello, the Bellevue Biltmore. Okay, play some golf, swim in the Olympic-sized swimming pool, eat in the Tiffany room, roam the, you know, the lawns. So it wasn't too bad to be there. And they actually had a bugler from Hollywood. I'm unfamiliar with the name, but maybe some of you know Bob Candreva. No? Nobody? Okay, and it's not just me. He recorded trumpet sounds for Paramount Pictures. So he was the reveler, and waking up every morning to someone who knew what he was doing must have been a joy there. The end of the columns in the Clearwater Sun come about the same time that you had the major criticisms of the military being here in Clearwater and being at the hotels. The trainees did have to go in for extended training due to the realization of what exactly they were fighting, and defense was needed against chemical attacks, bayonet drills, grenade practice, things of that nature. It was said that today they played soldiers at the front. Tomorrow they would decide with resignation and assurance that their future soldiering would be done on the home front. And this was in response to, again, civilian populations wondering what was going on out there. So once again, the colonel invited the populace out to the Bellevue Biltmore and took them through what the soldiers were going through. And so you have these little city councilmen going through and having fun and proving that they can do it, and then crawling off the field, and with the assurance that they would be plenty sore the next day. So each criticism was checked, was faced by the military. Bill Tordoff does recall marching out there and singing some songs, and he shared a couple with me. He's in his 80s, and I can't even remember what I said last week. So for him to remember what he said years and years ago is incredible. And he said they would sing this song: "Around her neck she wore a yellow ribbon. She wore it in the springtime and in the month of May. And if you ask me why the heck she wore it for her soldier who was far, far away." You know this. So far away, she wore it for her soldier who was far, far away. So they would sing these as they were training. His favorite, though, he said, and at first he was like, "I don't know if I should tell you this one." And I said, "Oh, please, tell me, tell me." So he said, "There sits a preacher sitting on a log with a finger on the trigger and his eye on a hog. Amen, amen." I was like, okay, which brought up the song, "Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition." So, you got that going. So criticism, rumors started abounding on whether or not the hotels would stay open as 1943 came around and March was there. Nobody really knew anything. Dredging of the bay right outside of the Bellevue Biltmore in June was taking place, and there was assurance that if the Army moves out, the hotels will be leased. There will be some other federal project to come in and take its place. And the reason there was concern there was, as I said, the economy was helped in Clearwater greatly. Post office receipts increased, utility receipts increased. There were actually stamp revenues of $2 million because of the soldiers writing home to their sweethearts. The Clearwater Chamber of Commerce actually provided them with stationery that said Clearwater, on there, so they could write to their sweethearts, their families, and say, "Hey, come to town." So local business soared, the movie revenues went up, and so that definitely helped. So as there were these rumors of losing this from Clearwater, they said they might be replaced from the Army installations in Dunedin, Oldsmar, Largo, that areas. And the Clearwater Transit Company actually started planning on extending their bus services at that point. But August 1943, all 3 hotels were turned back over to their owners, and plans were made to reopen for the new coming season. The Grey Moss Inn was scheduled to reopen October 1st. The Fort Harrison would open on December 15th. Unfortunately, the White Queen of the Gulf, the Bellevue Biltmore, would not reopen. Kirkby agents sold it to Ed C. Wright for $275,000 at auction. It reopened in 1947 and continued to prosper. Clint Mitchell recalls renovating the Bellevue Biltmore as well. As a young boy, he helped to clear it out, and then later on, he said it went through a period, different periods of restorations. And as owner of the Clearwater Paint Company, he would know. He said that they would actually bring in people and say, "Hey, we'll give you a room to decorate, and then we'll open it up and people can come and see what you did, and then you can get business." Of course, they wouldn't pay these people for redecorating the rooms and the cottages at the Bellevue Biltmore. But he said when he went in there, he said the place was pretty much trashed. Windows were left open, so the rain, the weather, chipped the paint. When they did take out things after they were done, they didn't bother with what they damaged. So they put in that $200,000 sprinkler system, but a lot of work was needed on the Bellevue Biltmore, and I guess that was a little too much for Arnold Kirkby to go through. And so resold it, and Now, once again, it's being restored, hopefully to its natural beauty and grandeur. So we'll see what this next chapter of the Bellevue Biltmore tells us. Thank you.